On the night of March 3rd, 2022, staff at the Hollow Creek Motor Lodge in Evansville, Indiana, received multiple complaints of loud thuds and yelling from room 108. When the night manager knocked, there was no response. After 15 minutes of continued noise, he used the master key to enter. Inside, he found a woman lying motionless on the floor, partially clothed, with visible trauma to her head and upper body. The scene was chaotic. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and blood splattered along the beige wallpaper. The police arrived within 7 minutes. The victim was pronounced dead at the scene. No one else was in the room. The hotel's registry showed that the room had been booked 2 nights earlier under the name Lucas Preston, with a second guest, Lana Prescott. Surveillance footage captured both individuals checking in, smiling, casual, holding hands. Detective Maria Santos of the Evansville Homicide Unit arrived at the scene just after 2 a.m. She described the room as violent in its silence, the kind of aftermath that made even seasoned officers step back. No weapon was immediately found, but Lana's wounds suggested a blunt object. Her ID, purse, and phone were intact, along with clothing and a packed suitcase, indicating a planned stay. When police reviewed the camera footage, it showed Lucas leaving the room around midnight. Alone, calm, but with his jacket slightly stained. He never returned. The next morning, a warrant was issued for Lucas Preston's arrest. By noon the next day, room 108 had been cordoned off and converted into a controlled crime scene. Crime scene technicians cataloged every item: broken wine glasses, a shattered lamp, a torn sheet partially wrapped around the victim's arm. No immediate murder weapon had been found, but a ceramic vase, broken into 5 jagged pieces, was collected as a potential blunt object. Blood patterns indicated Lana had first been struck near the dresser, then staggered toward the bed, where the fatal blow was likely delivered. Detective Santos requested a forensic pathologist be prioritized. Preliminary autopsy results confirmed blunt force trauma to the skull and upper spine. There were no signs of sexual assault or forced restraint. Toxicology reports were pending, but a nearly full bottle of wine was found, and 2 glasses tested positive for alcohol. As detectives pulled financial records, they discovered the hotel reservation was paid for with Lana's card. Although it was Lucas who had signed the check-in form, Lana's driver's license listed an address in Clarksville, over 2 hours away. Evansville appeared to be a neutral location, perhaps a meeting spot. When investigators contacted Clarksville PD to reach next of kin, they found something unexpected. Lana had no criminal record, but she did have a sealed court file under the name Leonard Prescott. The record was flagged as sealed due to gender reassignment and name change documentation filed 6 years prior. Detective Santos requested the file unsealed under the context of an active homicide investigation. Within 2 hours, the court approved. Lana Prescott had legally changed her name and gender in 2016. The photo attached to the original file showed a younger face, short-haired with a different expression, but unmistakably the same person. The question now shifted from "Who killed Lana?" to "Did Lucas know?" Investigators also learned that Lana had no living family but had worked as a freelance marketing consultant. Interviews with former clients described her as quiet, professional, and deeply private. A neighbor described Lucas visiting her apartment often in the past year. But they fought sometimes. Nothing serious, just shouting. With the information about Lana's past identity now known to the department, Detective Santos considered the possibility that the motive may have been tied to this discovery. But there was still no proof Lucas even knew. Her next call was to Lucas Preston's employer, a manufacturing plant in New Albany. He hadn't shown up for his shift. His last known address, a rental outside of Jeffersonville, had been vacated 3 weeks earlier. He was officially on the run. Detective Santos knew the case hinged not just on catching Lucas, but on proving motive, particularly if it was rooted in discovery and rage. Bolo alerts had been distributed across Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. Lucas's name, photo, and vehicle information were circulated to law enforcement and highway patrol. Still, no confirmed sightings had come in by the end of the second day. Meanwhile, a team was dispatched to Clarksville to speak with Lana's landlord. The building manager, Don Hensley, confirmed that Lana had lived in apartment 204 for over 4 years. He described her as low-key, polite, paid on time. When asked about Lucas, he paused. "I didn't know he was her husband," he said. "I thought he was an off-and-on boyfriend. He was here a lot, but there was tension. I heard them fight once through the wall." Hensley allowed investigators into Lana's apartment. It was neat, minimal, a shelf of marketing books, some art prints on the walls, no family photos, no wedding pictures, but the second drawer of the nightstand held a thin folder, marriage license, dated March 2021. Lucas and Lana had been married for 11 months. Detectives also found a small journal, mostly filled with business notes and grocery lists. But in one entry, dated 2 weeks before her death, Lana had written, "Lucas keeps asking about old photos. He says he found an envelope in the closet I never told him about. I feel sick. I don't want to lie, but I'm scared of what he'll do." That entry immediately shifted the investigation. It suggested Lucas had found something, and that Lana feared a reaction. Back at the station, tech analysts reviewed Lana's phone messages between her and Lucas in the week prior, showed strain he had sent. "You lied about everything. What else are you hiding?" She had replied, "I wanted to tell you. I was going to." The next day she texted, "Can we meet and talk? Please, I don't want it to end like this." That meeting, it seemed, had taken place at the Hollow Creek Motor Lodge. Tracing Lucas's movements after he left the hotel proved challenging. But finally, a breakthrough came from a gas station in Owensboro, Kentucky, just over an hour's drive south. Security footage captured Lucas fueling up at 2:57 a.m., wearing the same jacket from the hotel footage. He paid in cash. Now the manhunt had a direction. Detective Maria Santos stared at the grainy image from the Owensboro gas station for a long time. Lucas had slipped the camera's lens with almost surgical precision, but the angle just barely caught his face and the stain on his sleeve. It was clear now. He was heading further south and likely trying to disappear. She put in a request for the Kentucky State Police to widen the surveillance net. Back in Clarksville, a second search warrant was executed at Lana's apartment, this time focusing on the envelope Lucas may have found. In the back of her bedroom closet, tucked inside a boot, detectives discovered an unmarked manila envelope. Inside were 4 printed photos, old, faded, and unremarkable at first glance. But one was clearly a high school graduation photo of Leonard Prescott, dated 2007. Another showed Leonard with a woman, presumably his mother. The other 2 were vacation shots, all prior to transition. There was no note attached, no explanation, just the images. Detective Santos knew that for some people, especially those who clung to rigid ideas of gender and identity, such a revelation could shatter their sense of control. That didn't excuse violence, but it did begin to draw a line between motive and action. Meanwhile, forensic techs finished extracting data from Lana's laptop. Search history from 2 days before her death revealed she had looked up terms like spousal annulment, protective order Indiana, and what happens if you lie to your husband. Her browser history painted a picture of someone deeply afraid, possibly planning to leave or confess or both. Detectives finally reached a friend of Lana's named Gwen Talbot, a fellow freelancer in Louisville. Gwen hadn't heard from Lana in 2 weeks, but when told about her death, she broke down sobbing. After a moment, she confirmed what detectives feared. She told me Lucas didn't know at first. She was going to tell him, but then she didn't. And after they got married, it got harder to bring up. She was terrified he'd leave her, or worse. Gwen had also received a voicemail from Lana 4 days before the murder. In it, Lana sounded shaken. "He found something. I think this is it. I don't think I can fix it." Detective Santos pressed play on the recording again and again. There was no mistaking the dread in her voice. The next move was obvious. They had to catch Lucas before he hurt anyone else, or disappeared entirely. Detective Santos met Gwen Talbot at a quiet cafe in Louisville. Gwen looked exhausted, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. "This is the voicemail she left me," she said. The message played again. Lana's voice cracked with panic, whispering as if someone might overhear. "He knows, I think he knows. I didn't want it to be like this. I should have told him sooner. I think I have to go somewhere, just in case." Gwen had tried calling back, but the message had come at 2:13 a.m. Lana never answered. It was more than enough to confirm what detectives already suspected. Lucas's actions were premeditated, or at the very least, the result of a confrontation he had gone into with resentment already festering. Santos filed for a warrant to search Lucas's digital footprint, his text history, browser records, social media accounts. While awaiting approval, a call came in from the Kentucky State Police. A trooper near Bowling Green had found Lucas's car, abandoned behind a rundown convenience store off Route 231. The keys were gone, but his wallet had been left inside, along with a blood-stained jacket matching the surveillance footage. In the trunk was a small overnight bag with a burner phone and $600 in cash. The car had been reported stolen just hours earlier. Now it was clear. Lucas had ditched his own vehicle, swapped plates, and was likely hitchhiking or using buses to avoid detection. Detective Santos brought in a forensic linguist to analyze the final messages between Lucas and Lana. The tone of his final texts shifted from angry to coldly formal. One line stood out. "You'll regret what you've done." The phrasing was chilling. Combined with the timeline and evidence, it supported the theory that the crime was retaliatory and that Lucas had planned it after confirming Lana's transition. At the same time, analysts traced Lana's internet activity to several legal aid websites and LGBTQ resource centers. She had bookmarked pages about restraining orders and emergency shelter locations, but never submitted any forms. It seemed she had been preparing for a worst-case scenario, but never got the chance to act. The media team issued a statewide alert with Lucas's updated description and a public appeal for information. His face appeared on evening news stations across 3 states. Detective Santos assigned 2 detectives to canvass bus stations near Bowling Green. One lead emerged from a small depot just off Scottsville Road. A night clerk remembered a man matching Lucas's description buying a one-way ticket to Nashville, Tennessee, early that morning. He looked jittery, the clerk recalled, kept his hood up, sunglasses on paid cash. Surveillance footage confirmed it was him. The team alerted Nashville authorities. Transit routes, hostels, and low-budget motels were flagged. Lucas was moving fast, and Santos knew they were now in a race, not just to arrest a fugitive, but to prevent the case from slipping into cold case territory if he disappeared too long. Meanwhile, analysts finished examining the burner phone. Though it had no stored contacts or messages, it had pinged 3 towers between Bowling Green and Gallatin, supporting the Nashville direction. One outgoing call had been placed to a number traced to a disposable prepaid phone. No subscriber name, but the area code led to a suburb just outside Murfreesboro. Detective Santos requested access to financial records connected to Lucas's known identity, but activity had gone dark since Lana's death. His bank account had been untouched. No recent card usage, no ATM withdrawals, just the cash found in the trunk. Back in Clarksville, a new interview offered insight into Lucas's behavior. One of Lana's former neighbors, a woman named Denise Hart, recounted seeing Lucas weeks before the murder. "He'd sit in the car for hours outside the apartment," she said. "Didn't go in, just stared up at the window, gave me a weird feeling." That aligned with the chilling theory Santos was forming. Lucas hadn't just reacted violently to a sudden discovery. He had likely been stewing, unraveling inside, maybe even planning. The murder wasn't a crime of passion. It was personal, calculated, and fueled by betrayal and obsession. The forensic linguist added another disturbing detail. The phrasing in Lucas's messages, cold, formal, detached, was commonly seen in perpetrators preparing to justify their violence to themselves. "He's someone who thinks the victim owed him honesty," the expert noted. "He likely sees himself as the wronged party." Detective Santos knew now that if Lucas felt exposed or desperate, he might lash out again. The security footage from the Bowling Green depot confirmed Lucas boarding the Nashville-bound bus at 6:12 a.m. He kept his head low and wore a baseball cap pulled down over his face. He didn't speak to anyone, paid in cash, and chose a seat near the back. A witness on the bus later recalled, "He looked like he hadn't slept in days, kept looking out the window, like he expected someone to follow him." Detective Santos coordinated with Nashville police to narrow down the area around the final bus stop. Lucas had stepped off at a downtown transit hub, but didn't appear on the local cameras after that. It was as if he vanished into the morning crowd. The number dialed from his burner phone led to a break. Cell tower data showed the recipient device was active for only 15 minutes before being shut off permanently. However, the call pinged a tower just north of Murfreesboro, near an isolated cluster of trailers along a back road. Detectives dispatched a small team to knock on doors. One resident, a woman in her 50s named Tina Briggs, recognized Lucas from a printed photo. He showed up late yesterday, asking if he could use the phone, said his car broke down and he was trying to reach a friend. Looked rough. I let him use it, gave him a sandwich. Then he disappeared. Didn't say where he was going. Inside her trailer, detectives recovered the prepaid phone, dead and stripped of SIM. Lucas had likely dumped it to avoid being traced. Back in Nashville, shelters and low-cost motels were visited one by one. Finally, at a rundown roadside inn just off I-24, a night clerk named Rico Thomas recognized Lucas from a flyer. He stayed one night, paid cash, didn't give his real name, left early, real early, before sunrise. Cameras at the motel were old but usable. Footage captured Lucas walking out with a new duffel bag and a gray hoodie. In the background, a delivery truck pulled away. Investigators paused on a frame where Lucas glanced directly at the camera for a split second. His expression was blank, cold. Behavioral analysts now issued a critical update. Lucas was highly unpredictable. Isolation, paranoia, and a need to rationalize his actions were likely growing. If approached, he might turn violent, toward himself or others. The window for a peaceful arrest was narrowing. Detective Santos reviewed the footage of Lucas leaving the motel frame by frame. The duffel bag was new, probably purchased locally. The hoodie was pulled low, his face mostly in shadow, but one frame, just one, caught something rare. Lucas looking up, his eyes locked on the camera. Not panicked, not angry, just empty. Officers began canvassing truck stops and freight hubs within a 30-mile radius. In the early hours of the morning, a long-haul trucker reported picking up a quiet hitchhiker near the same exit where the motel stood. The driver, who gave only the name Rick, said the man matched Lucas's description exactly. Didn't say much, asked if I was heading south, said he'd pay in cash if I didn't ask questions. Rick dropped the hitchhiker near a rest stop just outside Chattanooga. Surveillance footage confirmed the time window. Lucas had moved again. With this new lead, Tennessee state troopers increased presence along the I-75 corridor. Posters were updated and the FBI was officially brought in under federal fugitive status. Meanwhile, Santos and her team began piecing together Lucas's behavioral pattern. They suspected he wasn't just running from police, he was running from what he'd done. Experts noted the stages. First, control, then exposure, then rage. But now came the reckoning, the psychological fallout. If Lucas saw himself as betrayed, as a victim, the next person he interacted with could become a surrogate target. Local detectives followed up on pawn shops and gas stations in the Chattanooga area. At a 24-hour diner near the bus terminal, a waitress remembered serving a man who matched Lucas's description. He ordered coffee, sat alone, didn't even touch it, just stared into space, paid in cash, and left. That sighting was from less than 12 hours ago. Back in Clarksville, Santos re-examined the journal Lana had left behind. One entry, dated 3 months before her death, read, "He's so kind when he wants to be. I just wish I knew which version of him I'm waking up to." Another, more recent, "I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." Santos had read countless journals over the years, but this one stuck with her. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. Lana never once expressed hatred or resentment, only fear and guilt and a growing desire to survive. That made Santos more determined than ever. They weren't just chasing a killer. They were chasing a man who had convinced himself that his actions were justified. That made him dangerous. At the Chattanooga FBI field office, a task force assembled for the first full joint briefing. Federal agents, state troopers, and detectives from Evansville and Clarksville gathered around a digital map littered with pushpins. Each represented a verified sighting, a clue, or a gap in time. Lucas's path formed a jagged line of escape, but now it was growing colder. An analyst from Quantico stood before the room. "This is no longer just a man running from arrest," she said. "We're looking at someone unraveling. Based on his behavioral pattern, his next move will be impulsive, but calculated enough to maintain control over his environment. Within hours, 2 new tips came in. The first, from a cashier at a gas station just north of Dalton, Georgia, who remembered a quiet man buying canned food, disinfectant, and a prepaid flip phone. The man paid in exact bills, avoided eye contact, and left on foot. The second tip came from a local farmer in nearby Ringgold, who reported seeing someone sleeping in an abandoned shed on the edge of his property. Didn't see his face, but there were footprints, fresh ones. Whoever it was, he was walking alone, no car. No, agents combed the shed. Empty, but inside they found food wrappers, a used first aid kit, and a small notebook. Most pages were blank, except for one scribbled phrase. "She lied. I gave her everything." Detective Santos read the page with a chill down her spine. The handwriting matched Lucas's from old job applications. The statement wasn't a confession, it was a justification. The next step was predictive mapping. Analysts reviewed terrain and accessibility, determining Lucas was likely trying to reach the Georgia-Florida border. His pattern showed a preference for rural, unmonitored roads, avoiding cities, banks, and cell towers. The assumption, he was heading somewhere familiar or toward someone. Background checks on Lucas's past revealed a previously unknown connection. His estranged older brother, Carl Preston, who lived off-grid in a remote area near Waycross, Georgia. The two hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but a single archived message from years back showed Lucas once wrote, "If I ever vanish, I'll come find you." That message now carried new weight. Law enforcement moved quickly. Aerial drones were deployed near Carl's property. Local deputies were dispatched to make contact, but Carl wasn't home. His mailbox overflowed, his generator cold. The trailer was empty, but there were signs of recent activity. Cans in the sink, an ashtray still warm, and footprints in the mud. Lucas might already be there, or might be watching from the woods. A tactical surveillance team arrived at Carl Preston's trailer at sunrise. The dense tree line behind the property was still wet with morning dew, and drone footage confirmed what ground units suspected. Someone had been moving through the woods overnight. The outline of a sleeping bag was found under a camouflaged tarp about 100 yards from the back door, along with cigarette butts and a cracked flashlight. No signs of struggle, just signs of waiting. Carl Preston was finally located later that morning, 40 miles away in Brunswick, Georgia, where he had been hospitalized after suffering a minor heart attack days earlier. When informed of the investigation, he sat in silence before saying, "I was wondering if he'd show up." Carl admitted he hadn't seen Lucas in nearly 10 years. Their last conversation had ended in a fight. He always had this way of flipping things, like if something hurt him, it became a weapon for him to use on someone else. He didn't care who. When asked if Lucas had ever mentioned disappearing to his property, Carl nodded. He said this place would be the perfect spot if he ever needed to go off the grid. With Carl's permission, the FBI installed hidden motion sensors around the perimeter of the property, mounted trail cameras, and left 2 plainclothes officers nearby in a disguised utility vehicle. The hope was that Lucas would return, or at the very least, try to retrieve something. Meanwhile, the forensic psychologist analyzing Lucas's notebook flagged the single line as significant. "She lied, I gave her everything." It reflected a specific narcissistic trait, entitlement to obedience. "This isn't grief," the analyst explained. "It's grievance. Lucas isn't sorry Lana died. He's angry she didn't meet his expectations, and that's the danger. He could easily reframe any woman's rejection or independence as betrayal." This update shifted the risk profile. Lucas may not just be hiding, he may be looking for a symbolic replacement, someone to project his anger onto. Within hours, local police in nearby Glynn County reported a disturbance at a rest stop. A woman had been followed into the bathroom by a man matching Lucas's description. She screamed. He fled. Cameras were damaged, but her description was consistent. Scruffy beard, duffel bag, gray hoodie, deep-set eyes. The timestamp, 32 minutes after drone movement was recorded leaving Carl's woods. He was close. The woman from the Glynn County rest stop A 36-year-old nurse named Jocelyn Hart was shaken but able to provide a detailed account. She recalled a man following her into the restroom quietly, his steps deliberate, his expression blank. "He didn't say anything," she said. "He just stared. It was like he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me." She screamed before he could act, and he fled, disappearing into the nearby woods. Forensics recovered a partial print from the bathroom door handle that matched Lucas Preston's. It was the first physical confirmation in days. Law enforcement intensified efforts. Checkpoints were set up on all roads heading east and south from Glynn County. Park rangers were brought in to assist with surveillance along marsh trails and wooded back roads. Tactical units were told to expect a cornered, unstable suspect who may lash out or attempt suicide. The psychological profile was updated again. Lucas was now entering what experts called a justification loop, a mental state where he would likely rationalize further violence as morally necessary or redemptive. "He doesn't see himself as the villain," said Dr. Braddock, the lead profiler. "He sees himself as betrayed. That's dangerous because it allows him to keep moving without guilt." Back in Clarksville, Detective Maria Santos revisited Lana's emails, trying to understand the days leading up to her murder. One message stood out, sent 2 days before her death to Gwen Talbot. "I finally told him." He didn't say anything, just stared. I don't know what that means, but I think it means something. The message, short and raw, confirmed the timeline. Lucas had known before the motel, long enough to plan. Meanwhile, a state trooper spotted a man fitting Lucas's description walking along an abandoned train track near Woodbine, less than 30 miles from the coast. The trooper attempted to approach, but the man bolted into the trees. A search team was deployed, but found only a discarded hoodie and an empty water bottle. Lucas was shedding identifiers, clothing, belongings, patterns. He was preparing for something, and authorities feared they were running out of time. Detective Santos, now operating from the FBI command center in Brunswick, reviewed the growing list of incidents with grim urgency. She knew they were close. Lucas was growing sloppy, erratic, but desperation could make him unpredictable. The next encounter might not end with someone just being followed. The emergency public alert went live at 6:02 a.m. across Camden County phones, buzzed in unison with a sharp tone and a warning. "Dangerous fugitive at large, do not approach. Call 911 with any sightings." Local news stations carried Lucas's image, scruffy, gaunt, with a fading scar across his jawline and a hollow stare that unsettled even seasoned anchors. By mid-morning, tips flooded in, some false, some outdated, but one stood out. A postal worker named Evan Price reported seeing a man crouched behind a dumpster near an industrial supply warehouse on the edge of Kingsland. "I thought he was homeless," Evan said, "but when I asked if he was okay, he didn't speak, just stared at me and walked away fast. Looked like he hadn't slept in days." When officers arrived, they found clear evidence of recent activity: a can of tuna, a stolen first aid kit, and a tattered notebook page with a single line scribbled in erratic handwriting. They always lie, all of them. The page was torn, as if ripped from the same notebook previously recovered outside Carl's property. Meanwhile, Detective Santos worked through Lana's digital archives with renewed urgency. In a deleted draft message to herself, retrieved from a backup folder, Lana had written, "I didn't want to be a secret. I wanted to be enough. I thought love would be bigger than truth." The message wasn't sent, and it wasn't addressed to anyone. It read more like a diary entry, typed in a moment of emotional exhaustion. But it painted a clearer picture. Lana had feared honesty not because she was ashamed, but because she loved him. That realization added another layer to the case. Lucas hadn't been betrayed by Lana. He had been given a chance to understand, and he chose rage instead. Tactical teams narrowed their search to a 6-mile zone east of Kingsland, near Marshland, and a closed-down train yard. Thermal drones picked up a heat signature late in the evening, too large to be an animal, and moving slowly. Officers were dispatched on foot, circling the target with silent caution, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. In its place, a still warm fire pit, a crumpled photo of Lana torn in half, and the duffel bag Lucas had carried for over a week, now empty, discarded. The message was clear. He was shedding his past, his possessions, his name, his story. What came next, no one could predict. At dawn, a small team moved through the marshland east of Kingsland, navigating waist-high grass and waterlogged paths. Drones hovered overhead, their infrared imaging searching for any sign of heat or movement. In the still air, even silence felt like a warning. Just past a collapsed wooden bridge, officers discovered a structure barely standing, a maintenance shack from the old rail line, half rotted and buried under vines. Inside, the floor was scattered with crumpled wrappers, newspaper clippings, and torn scraps of maps. In the corner, scribbled on the wall in black marker, were the words, "Truth dies in silence." Next to the phrase was a crude drawing of a stick figure with a broken heart drawn through its chest. It was clear Lucas had been there, and more than that, he had stayed long enough to leave a message. Detective Santos studied the shack in person later that afternoon. She crouched near the wall, examining every stroke of the message. "He's building a narrative," she said quietly. "Not just running. He wants this to mean something bigger than Lana. That makes him even more dangerous." The words matched the handwriting from both the notebook page found in Ringgold and the torn note near the warehouse. Lucas wasn't simply unraveling, he was externalizing. The more alone he became, the louder his internal monologue grew. And now he was leaving breadcrumbs not for help, but for legacy. A nearby gas station, just off Highway 17, provided the next major break. A clerk recognized Lucas's face from the alert and said he'd come in the night before. "He didn't buy anything," she said. "Just stood by the ATM for a while like he was waiting. But the weird thing was, he didn't look scared. He looked calm." Security footage showed Lucas pacing near the entrance, then slipping a folded piece of paper behind a fire extinguisher on the wall before leaving. Investigators retrieved it hours later. It was a letter, unaddressed, unsigned, written in neat block print. "I don't regret the truth. I regret the lie. If they all lie, how do we live among them? I saw her, and she wasn't her. She was something else, wearing her skin." The note sent shivers down everyone who read it. This wasn't just rage anymore. It was dissociation. Lucas was now viewing Lana not as a person, but as a construct, an idea that betrayed him. And worse, he was beginning to generalize that idea to others. Dr. Braddock, the FBI profiler, put it bluntly. "We're seeing the emergence of targeted ideology. It's no longer about Lana. It's about every woman who triggers his delusion. If we don't catch him soon, someone else is going to die." Detective Maria Santos watched the incoming footage with a heaviness in her chest. A drone had picked up a figure walking alone through a clearing just outside St. Mary's, Georgia. He was carrying something, long, wrapped in cloth, possibly wood or metal. By the time boots hit the ground, he had vanished into a grove of cypress trees. The object, whatever it was, worried her. Lucas had been weaponless since the motel. That might have changed. That same morning, an officer patrolling a utility substation on the outskirts of town found a backpack tucked into a crawl space under the main transformer unit. Inside were items that confirmed it belonged to Lucas. Half a protein bar, an old state ID card in his name, and another handwritten page. This one was different, not cryptic or accusatory, but almost organized. It read, "Targets lie, the world believes them, the world laughs at us. They strip meaning and rewrite truth. They smile while doing it. There are no laws when the law protects liars." Below that, a single word, witness. To the FBI profiler, the meaning was immediate. Lucas was preparing to act publicly, to make an example. He was escalating beyond random stalking. He wanted to be seen, feared, and, in his twisted logic, understood. Detective Santos called an emergency meeting with local and federal agencies. A lockdown protocol was drafted for nearby schools, LGBTQ+ community centers, and women's shelters. Undercover officers were stationed at all major bus terminals, clinics, and public parks. For the first time, Lucas was classified as an active domestic threat. By afternoon, a woman named Robin Ellis came forward. She had encountered Lucas the previous evening near the back of a grocery store in St. Mary's. He approached her asking for directions to the old ferry pier. "He wasn't aggressive," she said, "but there was something about the way he watched me. like he was studying my face too closely. The pier had been closed for months. No cameras, few visitors. Officers swept the area and discovered fresh boot prints near the dock, leading away from the main road and into the marsh trail beyond. They also found a paper cup with traces of saliva, sent to the lab for DNA confirmation. It was him. Now the hunt narrowed. The next move wouldn't be defensive. It would be an ambush. Detective Santos stood by the edge of the pier as the wind whipped through the tall grass. "He wants someone to find him," she said. "Not to surrender, to watch." They didn't just need to catch Lucas now. They needed to stop him before he gave the world a finale. At 4:17 a.m., the DNA results came back from the saliva sample found at the pier. Confirmed, Lucas Preston. With the physical link established, federal and state officers locked down the entire marsh corridor leading away from the ferry. Coast Guard units patrolled the waterway, drones deployed along the tree line. But Lucas remained unseen. That changed at 7:32 a.m., when a call came in from a morning jogger near Cumberland Road. She had noticed a figure lying in the grass, unmoving, 100 yards from the tree line. At first, she thought it was a homeless man. Then she saw the rifle. Plainclothes officers were the first to respond, followed by a tactical team. They surrounded the figure, only to discover a decoy. It was a pile of clothes, stuffed and weighted, topped with a wig and dark glasses. The rifle was fake, fashioned from scrap wood and pipe. Duct tape across the figure's mouth read, "Lies look real too." It was a message, a warning, a diversion, and it had worked. While teams scrambled to the decoy, a real alert came in from the southern end of the marsh trail, half a mile from a school that had just opened its doors. The school, Jefferson Primary, was already on lockdown due to the statewide alert system officers were stationed nearby as a precaution. One of them, Deputy Aaron Wakefield, spotted a man emerging from the trees, carrying a black duffel and moving with slow, measured steps. She called out to him. He didn't run. He didn't reach for anything. He just stared. When backup arrived, the man dropped to his knees. It was Lucas. He was taken into custody without resistance. In his bag, rope, duct tape, 3 kitchen knives, and a printed photo of Lana, taped to a hand mirror with the word "truth" scrawled over her eyes in black marker. During the initial search of his body, officers found a final note folded inside his coat pocket. It read, "If the world can't see what I saw, then I'll make them. If they won't understand, I'll remind them. Silence makes monsters." That same morning, Detective Santos arrived on scene. She watched from behind the line as Lucas sat silently in the back of the police cruiser, eyes vacant, face slack. Whatever storm had once raged in him now seemed dormant or simply burned out. The arrest ended the immediate threat. But for many, especially those following the case online, it raised a new question. Had he always been this man? Or had he become it the moment truth touched the wrong part of him? Lucas Preston was taken to the Camden County Detention Center under heavy guard. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. During intake, he complied with every instruction, like a man rehearsing his final act. His pulse was steady. No injuries, no outbursts. He was placed on suicide watch. Detective Santos and FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Braddock were granted an initial observation session. The goal wasn't to interrogate. It was to assess his mental state and determine whether Lucas even grasped the consequences of his actions. Inside the observation room, Lucas sat in his jumpsuit, hands folded in his lap, his eyes focused not on the glass in front of him, but just past it, as if watching a memory replay when Dr. Braddock asked if he understood why he had been brought there. Lucas responded after a long silence. "She became someone I didn't choose." It was the first thing he'd said since his arrest. Santos asked gently, "Do you believe Lana lied to you?" Lucas shook his head, slow and deliberate. "She hid. It's not the same thing, but it feels worse." The response disturbed even seasoned agents. It wasn't rage or sorrow, it was control. Lucas spoke with chilling clarity, as if he believed he had uncovered a universal truth no one else was willing to confront. When asked about the items in his duffel, he smiled faintly. "In case I had to remind them, Dr. Braddock concluded the session noting high-functioning delusional disorder layered with narcissistic collapse. "He doesn't see himself as broken," she said. "He sees himself as betrayed. That distinction will matter in court." Meanwhile, prosecutors began assembling the case. With physical evidence, journal entries, confirmed sightings, and digital communication, the charge of first-degree murder was indisputable. Added to it would be unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, attempted public endangerment, and possession of weapons with intent. But the deeper question, the one the media began asking, was whether Lana's murder had been inevitable the moment Lucas learned the truth. Could it have been prevented? Detective Santos, reviewing Lana's final messages again, said quietly to her team, "She gave him love, and when that didn't match his fantasy, he destroyed her for it." Outside the detention center, protesters had already begun to gather, some demanding justice for Lana, others shouting messages twisted from Lucas's own words. The story had ignited a cultural firestorm. For the first time since the arrest, Detective Santos wasn't sure which part disturbed her more, the killer or the people who wanted to become him. The arraignment of Lucas Preston was set for March 14th, just over 2 weeks after his arrest. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, protesters, legal observers. Outside, 2 separate crowds gathered behind barricades, one holding signs that read "Justice for Lana," the other bearing vague, threatening slogans lifted almost word for word from Lucas's notes. Inside the courtroom, Lucas entered with the same distant calm he had shown since capture. Shackled, silent, clean-shaven, wearing the county-issued uniform, he barely looked at the judge. He entered no plea. The prosecution laid out its initial evidence: the blood-spattered hotel room, surveillance footage, the burner phones, the journal entries, the staged decoy near the school, and the contents of the duffel bag. The final piece was a recording made during Lucas's psychiatric interview, where he clearly stated, "I didn't kill Lana, I corrected something." It wasn't a confession, but it was devastating. That afternoon, the judge ordered Lucas be held without bail, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. Defense counsel requested a continuance, citing questions around mental competency. Dr. Braddock, testifying as part of the pre-trial hearing, affirmed that Lucas was delusional but lucid, aware of his actions, the consequences, and most importantly, their public meaning. "He may be mentally ill," Braddock said, "but he is not insane." Meanwhile, Detective Santos met with Lana's longtime friend Gwen Talbot to prepare a victim impact statement. Gwen brought a folder filled with old texts, screenshots, and photos of Lana, quiet moments, meals cooked, jokes shared, and one final selfie taken 2 weeks before her death. "She was scared," Gwen said softly, "but she never hated him. That's the part I can't understand. She still wanted to make it work." The prosecution planned to use this as part of their narrative, that Lana's murder was not just premeditated, but devoid of provocation. Lucas had not been threatened. He had been loved, and destroyed that love in defense of a fantasy. Online, the trial had already become a battleground. Fringe forums treated Lucas as a martyr. Some called for his release, others praised his writings. Several law enforcement agencies flagged users echoing his language or fantasizing about similar acts. The FBI began investigating 2 anonymous accounts believed to have published a manifesto based on Lucas's earlier notes. The DA's office, anticipating a high-risk trial, began working with Homeland Security on courtroom safety measures. The building would be secured with metal detectors, designated protest zones, and media credentialing. The trial would be broadcast with a 15-minute delay to allow intervention in case of inflammatory or violent statements. Through it all, Detective Santos kept one image in her office: the last picture of Lana, smiling softly in her kitchen, unaware her life would soon be turned into a national debate. On April 28th, the trial of the state versus. Lucas Preston began under unprecedented security measures. The courthouse was cordoned off for blocks. Snipers were posted on adjacent rooftops. Inside, reinforced glass panels separated the gallery from the courtroom floor. No electronic devices were allowed. Media access was tightly controlled. Protesters from both sides stood face to face, chanting, weeping, shouting. When Lucas was led in, his expression didn't change. He wore a standard suit, hair combed, hands folded in front of him. But as he sat down and looked toward the prosecution's table, witnesses noted a strange smile tug at the edge of his lips, subtle, almost private. The prosecution opened with a clear message. This is not a trial about belief, it is a trial about murder. They displayed the hotel crime scene photos, the messages Lana wrote to friends, her digital journal, the surveillance footage from the hotel and gas stations. Piece by piece, they showed a man who moved deliberately, plotted quietly, and carried out the killing of his wife without remorse. Lucas's defense, surprisingly, did not deny the killing. Instead, they leaned into the narrative of emotional breakdown, betrayal, loss of control, an act of desperation. They called it an identity crisis of both parties. The courtroom fell silent when the defense attorney said, Mr. Preston was trapped in a lie, and the truth crushed him. But it was Lana's voice, brought to life through Gwen Talbot's testimony, that shifted the atmosphere entirely. Gwen read from Lana's journal, her final texts, her fears, her love for Lucas. There was nothing vindictive, nothing cruel, just a woman trying to protect herself from the person she loved most. She thought he'd understand, Gwen said, her voice cracking. She thought she could be safe in honesty. She didn't know it would kill her. The final moment came when prosecutors played the voicemail Lana left for Gwen 2 days before her death. I finally told him. He didn't yell. He didn't leave. He just looked at me. I think maybe that's worse. The courtroom sat in frozen silence. It took the jury less than 4 hours to return a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Lucas Preston was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial concluded, but the ripples it created continued. Legislators proposed expanded hate crime protections for transgender individuals. Advocacy groups launched campaigns in Lana's name. Her face, once hidden behind layers of caution, was now on murals, vigils, and banners of remembrance. Detective Maria Santos gave a rare public statement at the conclusion of the case. Lana wanted to be seen, not for what she was, but for who she was. She deserved to live, to love, to be known. Lucas tried to erase that, but in the end, he only made it more visible. In the months that followed, copycat threats were intercepted, monitored, and disarmed. The FBI launched new efforts to detect and disrupt emerging ideological violence tied to gender identity. But for Lana's circle of friends, and for Gwen, it would never be enough to undo what had already happened. Still, in a quiet park in Clarksville, beneath a tree she once walked past on her way home, a small plaque was installed. It reads, Lana Prescott, a life lived in truth, a voice that will not be silenced.